Now, today, question time back, Prime Minister still overseas, of course, playing world leader, cuddling up to lame duck presidents or prime ministers who, like him, have a very uncertain political future. But there were two stories in Canberra today, and I think one is an obvious one to talk about. The stories were the federal government making some moves about apparently protecting the use of cash when you go to certain shops, or a report that says there are 3 million Australian families who are in danger of homelessness. Which one do you reckon the media talked about today?
Retailers selling groceries, fuel and other essential supplies will be forced to accept cash under a plan to help those who haven't made the digital switch.
Cash may no longer be king, but the Albanese government is moving to keep currency in the economy.
The government to mandate acceptance of cash to protect the 1.5 million Australians who use it for 80% of their purchases.
Honestly. The details around this, surprise, surprise, are nowhere near what the press release said. The Treasurer put this one out this morning, the media fell for it, and by 6 p.m. it was a more dominant story than 3 million of our fellow citizens heading towards potential homelessness. But as always, there's an asterisk, there's a catch. This is not going to be the protection of cash and telling every retailer in the country that they have to accept cash. No, it's a review that will report back at the start of next year, and it will only affect essential services, where supposedly legal tender, which should already be accepted by everyone as a way of paying for things, after all, otherwise the bits of paper or the coin means nothing. But have a look after the review and they make the decision and they pass the rules, it kicks in on the 1st of January in 2026. So a story that doesn't really affect everyone who wants to use cash, which is a review into a system that will not return its findings, despite the fact that the government's already told us what they want the findings to be, will not report back until next year, and then it doesn't come into effect until 2026. Woohoo! Hold the presses. Breaking news. Meantime, the actual story of the day is this story about our fellow Australians. Now, I know some people don't want to talk about this because it does not have a silver lining. But right now, there are 3.7 million people in this country who have trouble getting a meal each and every day. There are people who are lining up for food banks. It has got worse and worse, and there are no signs of it getting better. There are also a significant number of people who are living right on the edge right now, and if they're not directly homeless, they're living in things like tents and cars. These are people who have jobs. These are people who go to work, but they don't have enough money to pay for somewhere to live. A report was released today by Homelessness Australia, and I think this should have got much more attention than the government trying to talk about anything but its bad economic record. I'll read from the ABC here. The rising cost of living and rates of rental stress have left about 3 million Australians at risk of homelessness. That's more than a 60% increase in less than 10 years. A state-by-state breakdown has found that Queensland and Victoria, they are the hardest hit here. In Victoria, 987,000 people are at risk of losing their home, according to this report. The state has seen 23% increase in rental stress. Put simply, if you are lucky enough to have a rental property, the increases in the rental property mean that people who have not seen any significant wage rises yet are still having to find extra money for all of those extra things that we've been talking about for the past couple of years, means they may not be able to pay their rent. If they can't pay their rent, they'll get booted out. And of course, we know there are so few properties that are actually available right now. This story to me is way more important than a review that reports back next year with consequences of 2026. And not for cash to be available everywhere or for it to be mandated that it must be accepted, no, only for essential services. And I don't think that there's any plan anytime soon for service stations or supermarkets to not be accepting cash. So it's a review into something that isn't changing with a promise of it not changing in 2026. But between now and 2026, 3 million people are right on the line, right on the line. The report's author and CEO from Homelessness Australia spoke to the ABC ahead of the release of this report today. And Kate Colvin said that people who could have afforded private rentals just a few years ago are now resorting to couch surfing, sleeping in cars or pitching tents. Now, there is something that the federal government could do in this situation, but of course they have no interest in doing that. And that is reducing the number of people that we bring into the country each and every year. Now, while Australia has a skill shortage, that is in part because generations of Australian politicians have shamed kids from picking up a hammer, for going to TAFE. Instead, from Kim Beazley right through to Anthony Albanese as Labor leaders, the preference has been go to university, you must go to university. Well, there's a story about that as well in a moment or two's time. But the reality is that while this Prime Minister told us that he was going to cut immigration, he told us that in December of last year, he has failed to deliver on that promise. In fact, the numbers, by any standard, are exactly where they were 12 months ago and exactly where they were 12 months before that. We are in a world of pain at the moment when it comes to migration, and it is become a political issue. Now again, for those that are half paying attention, for those that are getting ready to run off to the umpire, for those that are going to complain that somehow this is some sort of racist dog whistle, garbage. The reality is that when we keep bringing in hundreds of thousands of people and more than 1 million people since this government came to power, that is 1 million people that need to live somewhere. That's 1 million people who compete with the already struggling number of people for rental places. That is 1 million people who are competing with those that are struggling to pay for their first or family home. That is why immigration needs to be discussed. Because if we have a system where 3 million existing Australians are this close to being homeless and we are adding more and more people for them to compete with when it comes to rental properties, we are going to have more people homeless in this country. But as late as last weekend, Lefty Laura Tingle was writing in the ABC in the Financial Review that we need to have a mature conversation, a sensible conversation about migration. This, of course, is the lady who thinks that as a result of the issues that have arisen because of the problems of too many people coming into the country too quickly, that apparently we were going to turn on foreign-looking people if they were trying to buy a home.
For a major political leader to be saying, as Nikki says, you know, everything that's going wrong in this country is because of migrants. And, you know, I had this sudden flash of people turning up to try to rent a property or at an auction, and if they look a bit different, whatever you define different as, that basically he has given them licence to be abused.
Oh no, but we should have a sensible conversation. That's her starting point, a sensible conversation about migration. Australia has too many people coming to the country while too many people living in the country are struggling. The federal government is in a position to try to help those people, but literally they are spending twice as much money as they give to people like Food Bank on advertisements to make you think that they are doing anything about cost of living. Saving their own political backside is what they spend taxpayers' money on. Otherwise, it's up to charities to take care of those who are right on the line. 3 million people. I ask you, what was the lead story out of Canberra today?